All right, welcome everybody to according to Andrew number 11, the rise of the city-state. So I wanted to talk about what it would take for these smaller political entities to um, rise up and uh, supplant some of the what the various conditions were that needed to happen to have smaller political entities um, take the place of these larger centralized ones that we currently have. And this is generally how things go: is they centralize and they decentralize over time. So um, we're going to discuss kind of why that happens and what leads to that fragmentation and how things have and haven't changed over time that makes it. I don't think this time around it's going to be much different, but there'll be, as warfare and stuff like that has evolved, there's kind of different factors, or at least the factors on the ground change slightly. Um, so the weakening of the larger political centers and subdividing into the smaller ones. So this can happen several ways. It can happen from undermining of the central authority by not being able to um, control what they used to, and then therefore these political entities that are in these smaller areas kind of pick up the slack. This You see this kind of fragmentation happening in places like Mexico, where you have the central government basically hollowed out, and it's just a facade. And the people that are actually running the show are all the cartels, and so the government's like a facade that basically uh, it's almost been stripped down to the point of basically running the military and doing foreign relations, which is kind of its original intent. And then the people that run the show do things like police, law enforcement type stuff, and uh, along with all their other activities, legal and otherwise, um, are their cartels. And so that's kind of one way. And then obviously they all have their territories, and they're going to fight over the borders of those territories and stuff like that. But um, I guess I don't know this for sure, but outside the people that are actually in the gang, I highly doubt that the people that are within the territories of the cartels and these gangs and stuff like that identify with the gang itself. Um, and so while they are uh, while they might serve a function and they might work for people, it's I don't think it's going to be a strong enough identity long term to. I think that's like the Achilles heel weakness of it that could potentially lead to a re-centralization of power, where you could get people united behind a more classical idea of like Mexico as a people who are kind of fragmented anyway, because it's a very stratified group, right? They'll if you've done any job application before, they'll ask you if you're like Latino or whatever, and then they'll ask you your ethnicity, because it's like if you're in Mexico, you can be white, you can be um, Mexican, which is the Native American people there. You could be, um, forgot what their term for black was, but that group. And then there's, I think mestizo is like a mixture of um, two of those groups. So if you're Mexican white or if you're Mexican black, I think they had different terms for each of those. But basically, I'm gonna put that under mestizo anyway. Um, and so you can only get so much unification. So what might end up happening is, and this might already have happened. I'm not up on my all full Mexican gang theory. Is as the state apparatus crumbles more and more, and the gangs take over more and more functions of uh, the institution that is supposed to be provided by the government, they the gangs kind of split. So you'll have like um, a gang that's like traces his lineage back to the Mexicans. You'll have a group that traces his lineage back to Spain, and you'll have a group that traces their lineage back to Africa, right? And so you'll have that kind of split that'll happen, and then you'll have the people that are mixed will, I don't know, they'll get lumped in with somebody. I'm guessing they'll have to, either they'll end up as their own thing, or they'll end up choosing a side, is my guess. And I think there's enough mixing down there that they'll probably end up choosing a side. Um, and then so once that happens, you'll end up with a fragmented. So then the state apparatus would crumble away, and then you would have these, but then they would these entities that started off as fourth generation warfare political or military entities that then took on more political roles, and then eventually assumed a um, government role. And obviously there's going to be violence along that whole thing, but since a lot of their territory, like, it's going to be more skirmishes along the borders because a lot of these cartels already have um, their territory set up, and there might be some violence if like, because the general population's probably somewhat mixed here and there, so there might be, if people have to kind of repatriate to the new territorial borders, there'll probably be some violence over that, but um, the overall Mexican situation is looking like the violence will be limited uh, to kind of what they're already used to, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if a similar thing's going to happen in Brazil, because that is another group where they're stratif. There's lots of different groups and ethnicities, but theirs is set kind of in a caste system, as far as I can tell. Not caste might be the wrong term, but it's stratified to the point that um, I don't know. They make it work. I don't know that much about Brazil. Um, so that might be what happens to Mexico. So Mexico serves as a good example because if they go through that at the same time, like, all right, let's just for the time being say Mexico or America stays together while Mexico's going through all this. They kind of are already experiencing it. America's offered to kind of send stuff in, but in general, America's been staying out of it, outside of maybe some undercover CIA operations that we got going on in there. And that type of stuff going on, I think Mexico is pretty safe because their southern people from the south aren't in are politically fragmented to the point that they can't mount. Most of Central and South America is pretty politically fragmented, and they're not. Um, None of those countries have an empire building desire, nor the means to be able, political unity to be able to um, start a uh, empire building thing. On top of that, you have like the UN and stuff like that that kind of tries to stop that stuff. I don't know if someone actually went on an empire building spree if they would have the ability to stop them, but it's a theory. So Mexico is in a pretty good spot to where none of their neighbors are uh, imperial powers and a threat of imperial conquest, and that is a very big factor. Is the one of the number one reasons for political centralization and unity is threat of military conquest. And if you don't have that, then you can be a much more fractured and contentious, have a lot of civil wars and stuff like that, and it isn't a threat to your ability to govern. That's one of the advantages that Japan had is they were basically in civil war for like 100 years, I think, at one point. Like, it was kind of like on off kind of stuff. Um, but you had this going on for like 100 years, and in any other country, you wouldn't be able to get away with that because your neighbors would see that you're in the middle of a civil war, and they just roll in. If they had imperial leanings, they'd just roll in and take you over, and because you're politically fragmented, and you couldn't really stop them, kind of thing. Uh, so that's a big factor in these smaller political entities is being able to, and I guess I said the rise of the city state, so I should be a little bit more specific, but um, not having uh, not having a centralized, highly centralized political center near you with imperial ambitions is very important. Or if you do, making it so that them you staying independent is to their benefit. This is kind of how who was it? I think like the United Provinces, uh, which is now the Netherlands, I think, um, maintained like some of the. They didn't have a very strong military, but if they or just think of like Belgium during World War One and World War Two, right? So Britain had basically said we are uh, to try to box Germany in and make sure that they couldn't um, make good on any imperial ambitions that they had on the continent. Uh, Britain had said if you invade Belgium, we're securing Belgium's neutrality. So if you invade Belgium, then we will attack you. And then Germany did that, and then they got Britain involved in World War One and Two. Well, actually, two was when they invaded Poland. Britain had backed them, but anyway, World War One for sure. Um, so So yeah, so if you have a strong nation next to you, you got to make sure you got strong treaties. Um, I I think if there's a major financial collapse again, which seems to be coming up here, that might, depending on how the reset goes, if people can't run all of this stuff on debt and stuff like that, it might undermine larger political entities to the point that they can't function anymore. Like I don't know if you can run something the size of the United States on non-deficit spending stuff. Right? Like I can't even think of a nation that doesn't have deficit spending. So it's like, well, can you have a territory this large if you aren't running on like these deficits and stuff like that? And it seeming like the answer is no. So if uh, if the world goes uh, twice shy or once bitten twice shy kind of thing, when the except this will be twice bitten. Um, but if the global financial uh, system melts down completely, as might be happening right now, uh, and it isn't recovered, it might undermine the ability for large political entities to even exist, and therefore, uh, it gives a lot more power to smaller, more local political entities to rise up and be useful. Now, the the problem with fragmentation that is the problem of the Holy Roman Empire back before it was unified under Germany. It like it can stifle productive output. So if you tried to ship something into the heart of Germany, it ended up going through about 30 principalities, and there was a tariff on every single one of those principalities, and it made it so that you uh couldn't make any money. So if that or not make any money, but things cost so much that it was just too expensive to make. And uh, these smaller entities have uh, they can't be as self-sufficient. So like it, with a country the size of America, if we decided to lock down all the borders and we were like no one's outside, we're not doing any trade, any of that stuff. America has every resource it possibly needs, I believe, to self-sustain. Like America could go 100% isolationist and it would be fine. Um, well, okay, in theory, I mean be it would take a little bit of uh, industry rebuild to get there, but and there might be some stuff that we don't manufacture here that we would need to initially import to get everything set up, kind of thing. But we have all the resources, and uh, we could build up the industry to be able to self sufficiently make everything here, basically. And the resources is the big one, like because you can it costs time and money and industrial capital and all that stuff to build things like a factory and stuff like that. But once it's built, you just got to maintain it, kind of thing. If you don't have like rare earth elements in your nation, you're not going to get them, kind of thing. So, in that uh, regard, America is has enough fuel to be fuel efficient, or not fuel efficient, but fuel independent, and all this other stuff. And so it's a major advantage that America has over other nations. And so that's kind of a thing you're fighting against as a nation state is or not a nation state as a city state is your territory is much smaller, which is good because there's less people, which means the political entities have to be much more accountable, but uh, they can't leverage like economies of scale to the same degree, and so that's one of the reasons that they were outstripped back uh, as industrialization took over in the 1800s, and it might be the reason they're outstripped now. But like in America's case, because we've lost so much industrialization, uh, it might be better that we go back to a more localized thing and build up industrialization from there, and then unify as industrialization builds up in these local city-state type arenas. Uh, but yeah, so so the key things that are going to help uh, a city-state rise up again is making sure that um, their neighbors have limited imperial ambitions, and if they do have imperial ambitions, making sure that you have the proper alliances. Um, and if barring all of that, if there's something you can like, there might be a nation that has imperial ambitions but doesn't have the ability to make good on those imperial ambitions. So, uh, Desert Storm won, right? Iraq back in 1991, where they invaded Kuwait, I think, to make it so that they could have a seaport because I believe they're landlocked otherwise. Um, that was a country that had imperial ambitions, and they tried to make it happen, but um, as it could be seen by the fact of how quickly they got rolled over, a lot of it was paper tiger. A lot of their tanks and stuff like that were dressed up to make it seem like they had a bigger military because they kind of wanted So they didn't think as many countries would get involved, and it was a way to intimidate Qatar into kind of capitulating, um, which isn't a bad plan uh, until they they roll over all your tanks with air superiority. Um, so making sure that that kind of stuff can't happen. So in uh, while Qatar isn't a city state, it is a small nation that kind of demonstrates this idea of kind of having a uh, big brother ally come in and protect you. Israel uses this all the time, right? They have Big Daddy America um, ready to protect them when they are antagonistic to their neighbors. They seem to be changing that policy, but uh, that's one of the reasons Israel has been allowed, or not been allowed, but one of the reasons Israel has been able to survive all these years. They've definitely fought and won plenty of wars themselves, but um, having the U.S. as an ally was a big bonus. Uh, yep. So and then the another thing that's going to help uh, nation state or city states rise is fourth generation political instability. So basically, because of small, independent, non-state controlled armies that can be so disruptive to large political entities, local smaller political entities that have a much better lockdown of the territory uh, of their areas and can make effective use. Like it's hard to wall off all of America, and even if you do, um, it's you can't police every little inch of the vastness of America. But if you have a city state, a walled city center with various people that uh, town militias and town guard to protect it and make sure that disruptive forces can't overtake your city and all that stuff, that leads to much more stability uh, in a society that might be very unstable due to all of the various warfighting factions that might be around at that time. And uh, those are the primary reasons why a city states might be making a comeback um, in the coming decades. We'll see how it plays out as states are kind of put to the test with some of the instability that seems to be cropping up over time and potential financial meltdowns and stuff like that. We'll see how the political cards get played, but um, yeah, hopefully this gives you some ideas as to how things could potentially play out and why different political entities might rise up in these times that uh, previously seemed weak but have various advantages due to the situations of the times. Um, so if you found this interesting, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment if you want me to talk about anything specific or just what you thought about this video in general. Anyway, I have been Andrew Norris. This has been According to Andrew number 11. Thank you for listening.